Good morning, everyone. Looks like we're still getting a few people joining, but we're really happy to see everyone. I'm going to pass it over to our colleague, TA Hawks at Monument Advocacy, to do a little bit of intro and housekeeping before we jump into our event today.
Thanks, Ariel. Yeah, as people continue to join, we're excited to have everybody here for the virtual summit on climate, conservation, and regeneration. As a start for this event, just a few housekeeping items. All of us have done many Zooms over the last couple of years, but you'll see that you're muted. If you're interested in asking a question, please use the Q&A down in the bottom center. The Q&A for your submission. When you type your question there, it'll come to all the panelists that are part of today's summit. And don't use the chat. That does go to Tim Schmeling, who is in our bottom left corner and my bottom left corner. But if you have issues and technical difficulties, just that is where that function goes. So use the Q&A for questions. Over the last few months, our team at Monument has been working with the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, or MRCC. We've worked closely with the members of the collaborative to develop the report that's being released, and we're excited to have that today. And we're going to share a look at how MRCC is driving the expansion of regenerative ag in the Midwest and the Mississippi River Basin. And we'll hear about the opportunities that these on-the-ground projects have revealed for greater coordination between public and private sectors. And I think people hear a lot about very specific examples of on-the-ground collaborations, and that's exciting, especially as the conversation very soon turns to the Farm Bill reauthorization. Today, I'll hand it over to Ariel Kagan, and she's the Director of Ag Strategy at the Environmental Initiative, which administers MRCC, and she'll kick things off. So thanks for the time today.
Thanks so much, TA, and the whole Monument team. I also want to thank my team at Environmental Initiative who've worked to put on this event, and also to the Walton Family Foundation for supporting this work. This conversation comes at a very necessary moment because there's an urgent need for regenerative agriculture in the Midwest. This spring, we had record-breaking storms, which delayed planting, only to be followed by one of the driest Junes on record. This increasingly volatile and frequent extreme weather is a reminder of why we're invested in creating more resilient landscapes in this region. Agriculture sits at a unique nexus within the climate change narrative because agriculture is a contributor to climate change, but it's also a victim of climate change. And importantly, it can be a solution for the climate crisis. At MRCC, we work across the value chain to implement solutions that we see will have landscape level impacts. Here you can see our 2030 goals, which guide our work. These are fairly ambitious goals. We're looking to ensure that 30 million acres in the Midwest employ practices that support improved outcomes for soil health, greenhouse gases, water quality and use, biodiversity, and farmer livelihoods, and that at least 1 million of these acres will demonstrate multiple measurable regenerative outcomes. We also want to see a reduction in net on-farm greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest row crop supply chain by 7 million metric tons. And we want to directly support at least 30,000 Midwestern farm operations in the transition to regenerative agriculture. So these are not small goals, and we know that we have to work together to achieve these by the 2030 target. So today we'll be sharing a little bit more about our work and our partnerships and collaborations to implement regenerative agriculture across the Midwest and the Mississippi River Basin. Thanks to generous support from Hsbc, we're able to catalyze even greater impact through the expansion of projects and partnerships in Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, and Michigan, and we'll be sharing about that work today. Here you can see a map of where our MRCC footprint is, different projects across the region, and the little barn icons are where the Hsbc supported projects are, and all of these are done with collaboration across our partners and members. I'm also very pleased to share the release of our newest report today, which is called Working Lands Lead the Way, Policy Priorities for Regenerative Agriculture. And this report outlines the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative's policy priorities for the upcoming Farm Bill. As I said, we are at a pivotal moment for agriculture, and the policies laid out in this Farm Bill will have significant implications on our ability to reach our 2030 goals, because we know that this is sort of the last chance for us to get policy that supports what we're trying to envision by 2030. In the coming months, we're looking to strengthen partnership between the public and private sectors in order to enable and reinforce regenerative practices and support farmers in that transition. Some highlights from this report include our collaborative's policy principles, which are to support healthy ecosystems and farm resilience through place-based practices. Agriculture is employed as a solution for climate change. Systems change requires collaborative approaches. Equity and economic viability for all in the value chain, especially farm families and historically underserved farmers, and promoting regenerative outcomes. And so all of our policy recommendations then are built upon these principles that we collaboratively have developed. Just a few highlights from the report, and there are many more insights and recommendations that you'll find in the full report, but a couple that I wanted to highlight here are key recommendations include things like increased investment for and ongoing improvements to the delivery of conservation programs, prioritizing staffing and funding of social infrastructure needed to deploy technical assistance, improvement of robust measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification tools, exploration of innovation that incorporates environmental risk data into crop insurance programs, and the establishment of a regenerative value chain coordinator at USDA. And so all of these are sort of, high-level recommendations or ideas, insights that we think would support the kind of work that we see as working in the Midwest landscape based on our projects and programs, which we will hear more about in this hour. So the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative is made up of member organizations. You can see our members here. And these really span the full value chain from farm to fork. And it's important to have that systems lens and the different perspectives into how we can make change in our row crop system in the Midwest. So to tell a little bit more about MRCC and how we work, I am happy to introduce our co-chair of the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, Kate Schaffner. Kate is the Kellogg Company's Global Sustainable Agriculture Business Partner. She joined Kellogg in 2018 and develops global programs to support farmers' climate, social, and financial resilience, and meet the company's responsible sourcing and climate commitments for its priority ingredients. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Ariel. And thank you all so much for joining us today as we share this work and some of our priorities. So before we dive a little bit deeper into firsthand perspectives on what it means to scale regenerative agriculture in the field and in supply chains, I'll just offer a few remarks about the vision that drives the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative. They'll echo some of Ariel's comments about the challenges that Midwest agriculture faces. In American agriculture, the Midwest represents a globally unique and economically vital landscape that covers over 120 million acres, and row crop production is a driving force in that landscape. We know all too well, and if you are joining today's session, you may as well, that the region faces a significant and growing set of environmental challenges due to pressures on that landscape, whether it's related to impaired water quality, declining soil health, declining biodiversity, or climate impacts, particularly to resilience and ongoing soil carbon resources. These challenges are complex and interconnected, and they illustrate the urgency to support the resilience of this critical landscape. However, while there are significant challenges, there are proven and emerging solutions that can help to reverse these trends. And since 2016, this small group of leading food and agriculture companies and environmental nonprofits has embraced partnership across the value chain to drive improved outcomes in the Midwest. MRCC pursues solutions working together at a systems level to remove barriers to positive change. We do this by designing, funding, and implementing cutting-edge programs and pilots that demonstrate the soil, water, and climate benefits of regenerative agriculture practices and unlock strategies for building a more resilient food system. Last year, as Ariel mentioned, we raised our shared ambition with the announcement of our 2030 goals. And while MRCC members are driving toward those goals, we also recognize that policy plays an indisputable role in enabling change at the scale and speed necessary. MRCC members and the public depend on policies and programs at the federal, state, and local levels to help improve the harmful impacts associated with agriculture and invest in agriculture as a solution for climate. To help dive into this deeper, today we'll be joined by a group of panelists who will offer their firsthand perspectives on scaling regenerative agriculture. Building on insights just like theirs, representatives from each of our MRCC members have worked together to develop the set of policy priorities included in the report that we're sharing today for improved outcomes in the row crop system, largely tied to the three key barriers we focus on in our work together. So in just a moment, we'll get to hear a bit more about our panelists' experiences and perspectives on how we move forward. First, we're going to watch a brief video, so I'll hand it back to the Monument team to get us started. You may want to increase your volume a bit if you're joining us so that you can hear the audio.
Today, in the Midwestern United States, innovation and opportunity are growing in the minds and practices of farmers. They are not alone in their efforts. The Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, with corporate and nonprofit members, is delivering a powerful combination of expertise and commitment to drive this shift. Since 2016, member support of sustainable farming practice adoption is leading to a more resilient, environmentally healthy, and economically viable U.S. food and agricultural system. This includes engaging more than 900 farmers on over 300,000 acres in 2020 alone. This ambitious transformation becomes possible by collaborating with diverse partners, building relationships with farmers, and deepening understanding of local needs through place-based approaches. Our members are developing innovative ways to finance the transition to sustainable practices, reducing risks farmers face when making the transition, building and partnering with farmer networks, creating demand for sustainably produced row crops, and strengthening the link between consumers and farmers to support sustainable agriculture. A reliable food system, vibrant rural communities, and a healthy natural environment are within reach as Midwest Row Crop Collaborative members design, fund, and implement cutting-edge programs to demonstrate the soil, water, and climate benefits of regenerative agriculture. The future of farming is being planted.
One simple but brilliant trick.
Fantastic. Well, now as we shift gears to hearing directly from some of the key voices engaged in this work, I want to introduce our panel moderator and our fantastic partner in this work, Ray Johnson. Ray is the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability in the United States for Hsbc Bank. With nearly 40 years at Hsbc, Ray has served in various roles, including sales, mortgage underwriting, collections, customer service, marketing operations, and since 2009 in corporate sustainability. In his current role, Ray is responsible for US corporate sustainability and community investment strategies, primarily focused on workforce development and financial literacy programs for marginalized communities, the Hsbc Climate Solutions Partnership, and US disaster relief responses. Ray is also the national co-chair of Hsbc's Pride Employee Resource Group, providing support and allyship to the LGBTQ+ community. Over to you, Ray.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What a warm welcome. And so excited to see such a great turnout for this session. I love the farm to fork concept, and the visual of that is so powerful. I'm in New York City, but tomorrow I will be back in rural Michigan. Just to add to my bio, my family are farmers, and my grandparents, my mom. My first job was a farm hand. My first promotion was from the field to taking care of the livestock. So I've got some farm cred, if you will, and I know how hard farmers work for all of us. This partnership with Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, and I'm just going to say MRCC from this point forward, because that's a mouthful, started with Hsbc about a year ago. Because for 40 years, Hsbc has been focused on climate. And our most recent iteration of that focus has been with the Climate Solutions Partnership. And it's a new 5-year, $100 million global philanthropic partnership in which we work with the World Resources Institute, WRI, and the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, not the Wrestling Federation. And they help bring climate solutions to life. And importantly, because this is critically important to both the farmers and the practices, how do we measure these outcomes? And so as we focus on restoring and protecting our planet's ecosystems, we know that it's crucial. Reducing the carbon emissions is for climate change and all the biodiversity that goes into that. In our work with MRCC, we really are focused on supporting farmers in adopting regenerative farming practices, scaling those practices up, and making sure nature-based solutions are understood and lead to a more sustainable future. And as well, at HSBC, we're focused on revising our business practices to support farmers and the boardroom. So we're taking an active part in reducing carbon emissions and influencing that through things like a $1 trillion commitment to finance investments between now and 2030, helping our customers transition to a more sustainable business model. And we're also focused on the supply chain, something critical to the success of farms and farmers. So we're working with places like Walmart to make sure their supply chains are more sustainable. And so enough about me, enough about HSBC, because we're here to hear from these wonderful experts. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you 3 individuals with very unique perspectives on this shift to regenerative agriculture. And they're going to share their insights with us, outline some key opportunities, answer a few questions that we've prepared in advance, and answer your questions. So get your typing skills ready and get those questions in the Q&A so we can make sure we have a great, robust discussion. So first, I will introduce Margaret Henry, who's actually born at a Kentucky dairy farm. So Margaret, you and I are both former farmers. You spent your life and career working to improve social, economic, and environmental outcomes for rural communities. And you're focused on improving sustainable food systems in government, NGOs, private sector, through your work in places as varied as Mozambique, Brazil, the US, and India. Currently, Margaret is the Senior Director of Sustainability Strategy and External Engagement at Pepsi, where she works on their strategy to expand climate resiliency and regenerative farming practices around the world. Next, introduce Lydia English, who is the Field Crops Viability Manager for PFI. And in this role, she oversees cost share and business development projects that empower farmers to grow more cover crops and small grains in extended rotations. Prior to working at PFI, she got a master's in sustainable agriculture from Iowa State University, go Iowa, and she continues to live in Ames, a fantastic city. Ed Olson runs Someday Farms, a diversified 800+ acre operation with his family, and that farm is in northwest Washington County near Craig, Nebraska. Ed grows corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and some years oats. Also raised 10 to 12 Holsteins for butcher and 20 stock cows. Ed started planting cover crops 6 years ago and has seen multiple on-farm benefits, including protection against soil erosion during the 2019 flood and opportunities to graze cattle. And at the core of a decision to plant cover crops is his desire to protect local water resources by keeping soil and nutrients on the farm. And I should add, Ed was up until 2 a.m. baling hay today. So Ed, applause to you. I hope you got a little bit of coffee in you. So we can keep you going here. And again, thanks for your hard work to serve all of us. And actually, Ed, I'm going to start with you. So get ready. Here's the first question to Ed Olson from Someday Farms. So Ed, thinking back to when you made the decision to try cover crops on your farm, please share with us what sparked your interest and what have you viewed as key to your success in adopting these practices over the last 6 years?
Well, I guess I was like anybody else. my first experience with cover crop was wondering how I got weed in my field after a neighbor had aerial applied cover crops, and I had these strange plants in my field. I didn't know what they were, but that's how. But with the cover crop program, I mean, it all goes back on our farm. We're trying to do everything we possibly can to keep fertilizer, chemicals, keep the soil in place. I mean, we don't want it going down that creek. I mean, we are blessed in the state of Nebraska to have the most miles of rivers and streams. We have the Ogallala Aquifer underneath us. I mean, we have a lot of responsibility with that, and anything we can do to keep, you know, our water clean is very important to us. So when we first started this, that was basically the reason, was just trying to keep the soil in place. As you mentioned, in 2019 was we were a couple years into it, but we had torrential rains. I mean, it was in March, we had 4.5 inches of rain. The sheet erosion was just terrible. And where we had planted cover crops, we had about a 30 or 40 acre plateau that drained down on the side hill. And we didn't have to do any maintenance of ditches or anything. We planted right through it. If that doesn't sell you, I don't know what will on cover crops. I mean, right there, how that held that soil, because neighbors had sheet erosion where it took maybe an inch of soil, topsoil, which we only have about 6 inches left anyway, and just sheared it off the side hill and took it down into the creeks or down to the bottom of the hill. I mean, right there alone, the cover crops were just amazing that they held. Other benefits, you know, it's just being able to feed your livestock. And hay right now in our area, they're selling 160, 180 bucks a ton going out of the field. So when the cows out on the stalks, and with technology, that's all changed too, because now we have BT corn. We don't have all the corn that we used to have on the ground. You know, the cattle could go out and graze in the fall. For people that understand, after the crops are off, we put fence around our corn stalks, let the cows out. It's just a cheap way to feed them. Now with cover crops in there, I mean, it's just unbelievable that we can save that much feed. We get a heavy snow, comes springtime, that ryegrass greens back up, and we're ready to go again. Other benefits of cover crops, we do a lot of terrace work where we push up a dirt berm on a hillside to help kind of slow that water going down, and then it filters either through a waterway or a tube that takes it down to the creek at a slower progression. So we did some terrace work out here, and wherever you run heavy equipment, and I'm sure everybody understands, it's got to pack the ground, and it just makes a mess out of that field for a couple of years. Well, with talking to other PFI members, you know, and other guys in the community, they said, well, throw some radishes and turnips in out there. We threw those radishes and turnips out there. And I went out and actually took a picture from the new terrace, standing on the new terrace, took a picture. And usually you would see this progression of really green beans coming down, and then they would just get shorter and shorter and shorter until you got to the terrace. You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you mean. Exactly.
And there was no drag. We had no drag on yield.
Wow.
It was just crazy how that broke it up. We did a summer program. So we did that terrace work in the summertime, planted oats first, built the terrace, and then come back in with that cover crop and planted it in late July after we got the terrace done. And the next year when we planted the soybeans, there was no drag in that field at all. None. You could not see it.
So I mean, that's incredibly compelling. And I think a natural follow-up question that would be on everyone's mind is, are you able to provide an economic return estimate based on some of those practices? You know, so profitability or yields, things like that. Could you touch on that briefly?
Well, we're seeing now, especially with the ryegrass, one thing that was completely outside of the box that we didn't even imagine was, on our farm, we have buffers along the creek. We have some buffers along the edge of the fields trying to help where the end-rows go. But when you have buffers, sometimes you're going to have some species that you don't want, called weeds, which we do. Mare's tail is one. That's a problem. We'd have to use a specific chemical to kill the mare's tail. With the ryegrass now, that were planted. There's a toxin in the soil that the rye roots set off. We don't have mare's tail anymore.
Ah, interesting.
So
okay.
all of a sudden now that's maybe 15 bucks an acre for
right.
chemical that was specific to kill the mare's tail.
You don't have to do.
You start figuring, you get an open winter and you get some growth on your cover crop. It's 60 bucks a ton, or 160, 180 bucks a ton for hay. What's a cow got to eat in the winter time? I mean, you start adding up all those things. And then your soil, how do you put a value on your soil?
Yeah.
You can't.
Exactly.
There's no way you can put a value on your soil. That's the most precious commodity we got. And practices are changing. You know, the carbon credit thing, man, you used to be able to drive around a section here and you maybe see 2, 3, 4 empty, you know, vacant places that had trees, that had grass. We're starting to get kind of a sterile, barren countryside, because farmers are getting bigger. They can plant right up to the creek with the technology that they have today. And so we need to kind of have these cover crops. We need to try to take care of our soil. We need to take care of the environment. So maybe we don't have these storms, you know, get things calmed down a little bit. We got to do everything we can.
Yeah, agreed.
Hope I
Thanks,
answered
Ed. Yeah, you totally did. And I'm sure we'll come back to you. I think you've teed up some great thoughts for Margaret, because Ed, as you said, you've been at this for multi-years. And so Margaret, I want to ask you about Pepsi and experience with multi-year projects. You've got a cover crop project with Unilever. I think it's in Iowa and Illinois, and you've also been experimenting with new approaches and partners. So from your perspective, what does collaborative action look like beyond short-term projects? You know, it's really getting past that 2-3 year mark. So there's a proof of concept, if you will. And what role have corporate and NGO partners played in making that happen and helping you to advance that?
Sure. Well, thank you, Ed, for such good stories and just a good history of what this really takes on a farm. I think you make it sound easy, though. I would say, you know, when Pepsi thinks about this, we think about it as a system, because it really is. And so that's why we're playing a role in this, is because we're part of the food system. And we rely on a lot of farmers like Ed for the products to make the things that we put on the shelves for you to enjoy every day, if it's your Quaker Oats or your Doritos or your Pepsi Colas. And when we look at that system, we alone, through any one of the things we buy in any given year, can't make the kind of changes that help support farmers like Ed to do these practices and to have the infrastructure that supports it. The policy infrastructure, the social infrastructure, the agronomic support, the financial system that actually supports these kinds of transitions to a system like Ed's. So when we enter into this, we're thinking about what's our part of that system. How do we work with others? If it's where we're buying corn and Unilever is purchasing soy, and that's what the farmers are rotating, how can we come together to support the right system for those farmers to get one message from some of those companies that are purchasing their goods and one set of support? So in that system, we always start with the farmers and we say, you know, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities, not just this season, but over the long term. You know, we want to be in business for a really long term, which means we want all of our farmers to be in business for a really long time. And so that's not a one-year system. And something our Chief Sustainability Officer says a lot is we have 2030 goals. That's 8 crop seasons. That's only 8 chances to try to get this right. When we talk to a lot of farmers, they say, you know, I've got 40 crop seasons in my life, in my career. And so I don't want to mess one of them up. So we want to be a positive part of that system. And so that's why we work with the kinds of players we do, if it's peer companies, if it's our own customers, if it's experts like Practical Farmers of Iowa, and where it's collaborations like the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, where we can come together with different parts of the system and learn from what's worked and what hasn't. So that's the kind of players we try to put together when we're thinking about the system for the long term. And when we try to understand in any given geography how PepsiCo can be a positive force in that system, we find all the right players and we try to get together and say, what's the system's change that needs to happen? And how can we be a positive part of it? So in Iowa, that means working with Practical Farmers of Iowa and Unilever and Cargill and ADM and just a lot of different players across that system to make positive change. It means working with government entities because we're all part of that system. And at the end of the day, we all need to support farmers like Ed to support other farmers and folks like Lydia to support other farmers. PepsiCo's never going to wander onto your farm and tell you how to farm. But we want to help support the kinds of choices and the kinds of mentorship that are really important in that system.
Oh, so well said, Margaret. And it's interesting. We're kind of bookending here between corporate, farmer, and we're going to get to farmers, the farm advocacy group in a moment. But one of the things we did at Hsbc I didn't mention was we held some media training for farmers. So that's another area of expertise corporations can bring to the table to improve storytelling, so that, you know, when Ed tells his story and gets on camera and advocates, you know, it's as powerful as it can be. So there's a lot of different touch points for us. So I'm just so really inspired by all the work Pepsi's done and continues to do. I think it's just phenomenal. So well done. So Lydia, we have bookended. So we've got Ed and Margaret teeing you up. So this is a wonderful place to ask a question. And it's a doozy, I think, because my question's around, in a system as complex as U.S. agriculture, where do you as an NGO find the greatest value in working with the public and private sectors? And expand on that. What are the gaps that, just if you could, you know, turn a key tomorrow, we should be doing more of or less of? Because to Margaret's point, we're not going to go out on the farm and tell the farmer how to farm, but there's areas of opportunity for all of us, I think.
Yes, quite a doozy of a question, Ray, but I will do my best. And just to give a little context of who we are, you know, I work at Practical Farmers of Iowa, or PFI as we're known, and we're an independent nonprofit based in Ames. And really, we've been around for 30 years, and our bread and butter throughout that time has been farmer-led education and farmer-led on-farm research. But in the past sort of 5 to 7 years, we've done increasing partnerships with food and beverage companies like PepsiCo and Unilever to help farmers implement these practices, like cover crops and small grains and extended rotations. And when I think about, you know, being an implementing partner and sort of being a translator from both companies to farmers, and then also aligning public and private sectors, I think we all get the best and the most value out of just having a more cohesive shared vision. So, you know, we're working with PepsiCo or other companies and sort of listening to them and pushing them along their regenerative journey and taking our leads from them. And then we're also, you know, have an ear to the ground in the public sector and work with NRCS and work with other organizations to help them have the most up-to-date agronomic recommendations and practices for things like cover crops. And so I think aligning us all together is only going to help us move the ship forward for helping farmers increasingly adopt these practices. Because we have seen, you know, increased adoption over the years. We've been working in earnest on helping farmers increase cover crops for the past decade, and we've sort of got this slow increase in adoption over the years. But more recently, with this increased public and private investment, we're seeing, you know, a lot more interest in helping farmers in regenerative ag, which is awesome. And so it's just making sure that we're all aligned together so that the message to the farmer is clear, so that we're thinking of this, as Margaret says, as a system and not just a one-time approach. And I think that is probably what we need more of, is, as Margaret said, is just making sure that we're aligning all these parties together, because the cropping system, farms are a system. And so we want to be able to support at all different types of intervention points along the way, to really make sure that that can function. Like Ed said, he can, you know, farmers can see value across their rotation and in different parts and at different times of the year.
Oh, thank you for that, Lydia. And I think it's a great jumping off point to Ed to come back to you, because one of the questions that has been submitted, thank you, Sunny, is about your approximate upfront cost per acre to add cover crops. And did you have to fund that 100% out of your pocket, or were you able to find some funding assistance as you embarked on that journey 6 years ago?
Well, there has been, you know, through Cargill, we've got some assistance. It comes to $10 an acre all through the FSA office. There's been a rebate kickback on some of your crop insurance if you put in cover crops. So that has helped a little bit. As far as expense, I just called the guy that we fly ours on while the corn is still standing to get a jump, because in our area, we don't really have enough time to get any growth if we go post-harvest. So we're actually planning ours with a helicopter. I talked to him yesterday. It's going to be $15.50 an acre this year with fuel jumping up. It's $10 an acre plus 11 cents a pound. And we put on 50 pounds of rye. I haven't got a quote on the rye yet, but you know, there is some costs there to get started. And we have had better success with a helicopter than with an airplane. The guys with the airplanes have not had quite as much success as what we have had. Even last year when we were really dry going into fall, the helicopter, I don't know if it's the downdraft or the blades that help kind of push that seed down in there or not. And a lot of it's timing too. It's even by the variety of corn, you got to be very careful because you want those leaves to be dropping. So we usually do ours in about mid-September, just to get a little jump on it. First part of September to mid. It's just when we kind of watch the corn to see when the right time is to do it. But I should have probably did that just with the blur of things that we've had going on here. I didn't get a quote from our seed supplier on what rye is going to be. And we're also thinking about maybe doing some cocktails, doing a little wider variety, just to see if we can get any growth out of them. But yeah, application, and that's our biggest stumbling block right now for everything's went up so much here. A lot of that's a little bit of drag. If I could just add one thing that I think would help, and cut me off whenever you have to, but would be back when I started no-tilling, they had a program where you signed up to no-till for, I think it was 3-4 years. And there was cost assistance to help you get started. But with that, you had to go to meetings, annual meetings, where Dan Gillespie, who from Nebraska was like a guru of no-till and who's just passed away, and cover crops. But at that time he was no-till. I mean, that in our area, that really built the network of people that were no-tilling. It got them over that edge. They got paid a little bit to try it. And sometimes that's all you have to do is to get your feet wet in it, and then you'll succeed. But it's always that bottom dollar that people look at. You know, they're thinking it's got to be cost prohibitive when it's really not.
Oh, that's such a good point. And applying some of what was successful in the past is really important. That doesn't always happen.
Having those guys that are experts at it. I mean, there's young guys around here that are just, man, they're doing some stuff that's just really mind-boggling. I mean, I admire those guys so much that are around here that are trying. They've got rollers, crimpers, you know, they're doing different cocktails. I'm an old guy. I mean, those young guys, they're all on top of it. They're really doing good.
Mm.
Ray, if I could just add something real quick, just to echo Ed, you know, when we're administering these cost share programs for farmers in Iowa and Nebraska and so forth, you know, we're collecting information about the cost of cover crops. And so I just want to reiterate what Ed said, that, you know, on average, we're seeing a seed and application cost of about $25 per acre in total. That's just an average from, you know, a couple hundreds of farmers. And so we do know that it's a cost. But as Ed also mentioned at the top of the hour, you know, he's recouping that cost by having animals grazing that cover crop and by lowering his herbicide product and passes. And just as he said, now, you know, farmers can see that or might gain more confidence trying that out when they can see other farmers doing it, when they can see farmers like Dan Gillespie who, you know, pioneering things and then trying it out on their own farm. And so, you know, having that space to be able to build those networks and get those farmers together is really important to us. That's sort of what we're in the business of, and, you know, helps to make those practices endure on the landscape, whether we have a cost share program or not.
Right. And I think that's important as well. And thinking about that kind of leads me to think about supply chain, coming kind of back to that. You know, I mentioned I'm going to be back in rural Michigan tomorrow, and it always strikes me when I go to the local market and it's an independent small town one stoplight, you know, kind of grocer. And, you know, he'll have a sign when sweet corn season hits, he'll have a sign. It's like Kazanowski Farm, Kanoki Township. And, you know, it's like, I'm like, I know the Kazanowskis, right? I know Kanoki Township. I'm going to stock up, right? So when you think about supply chain, and maybe not from that kind of small town perspective, but either Margaret or Lydia, talk more about the mechanics of supply chain projects. You know, there's a term, three-legged stool, right? So how does the practice of adoption happen, and what does that look like in the real world? And Ed, of course, you're welcome to add too, but Lydia or Margaret.
Do you want to start, Margaret, or do you want me to?
Either way, Lydia, you go for it and I'll compliment.
Okay. So when we're, I would say, starting some of these supply chain initiatives, and I'll just be honest, I don't have a background in supply chain management, so you know
I don't either.
I'll stay in my lane perhaps in this one. But yeah, we're really thinking about providing that economic support to farmers, that de-risking. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a cost share; it's just some way to de-risk adopting a new practice. And for us, oftentimes that's cost share, but we're also like to pilot other interventions that might, you know, still get at that sense of, okay, I'm feeling like there's not too much risk with me trying something out in this farming season. And, you know, there's a safety net there if all else fails. And then, you know, we'll hopefully see those environmental benefits of that practice, and that can translate on the farm. But then also, you know, again, what makes us unique as an implementing partner is building that social safety net, you know, that social network, that grassroots community. And, you know, that is very place-based centric. And so when companies are coming in and interested in a supply chain initiative, you know, if it's in Iowa, great, they should totally talk to us. But if it's in someplace else, they should, again, and I think Pepsi's done a good job at this, find that implementing partner, you know, those folks on the ground in Nebraska, that group of farmers Ed's talking about, and really partner with them to make sure that, you know, when there's farmers trying out a new practice for a supply chain initiative, you know, they have those other farmers to lean on, so they don't all have to make the same mistake. And I think that no matter the practice and sort of no matter the commodity, that is, you know, a steadfast truth or something that we should all consider when we're thinking about doing these sort of supply chain initiatives and interventions on farms.
Yeah, completely agreed, Lydia. And when we think about it, we do think about that three-legged stool you said, Ray, which is to really support this work, you need the financial piece, you need the social piece that Lydia just talked to really well, and you need the agronomic piece, whether it's independent or another entity, but we are often supporting some of that independent agronomy advice as well. We have a farmer in Illinois who's starting to do some no-till, maybe a little cover crop here and there, but he said, you know, that field over there, they did cover crops 30 years ago. And it failed, and their whole main crop failed. So no one in the entire county has been willing to try for a generation. And so we are really thinking at the top of our minds that providing that independent agronomy and that social network so that you can learn how to do this well is just critical. We absolutely don't want any farmer to fail the first time they try something and get that kind of taste in their mouth to not try it again. And you talk about the economic payback for the farmer. I mean, it can be forever or it can be really short. And doing the practices the right way, having the right advice around like, what should I plant? How do I kill it this year when it's really wet? What about next year when it's really dry? That's just absolutely fundamental to anything that we're trying to encourage. If it's nutrient management, if it's tillage practices, if it's cover crops, if it's a diverse rotation, all of that requires expertise from your social network and your agronomic network. And I think that's really fundamental to how we think about how to do these projects. And then in terms of supply chain dynamics, I mean, I won't dive too deep there, but I'll just say we're seeing a lot of benefits. Those anecdotes are adding up about that time that climate change is here and there's a flood and no one can get in their fields to plant, except those guys who have some cover crops to roll over to not get their tractor stuck in the mud because they literally have something to drive on top of. Or that time when it's a drought and their soil has better soil holding capacity because they've been doing no-till for a few years. You know, those stories that used to be really nice anecdotes are increasingly adding up to significant resilience in supply chains. And that is critical for the future that is, frankly, here today.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry, Ed, did you want to add anything before I go to the next question? If not, it's fine.
No, I was just, that whole thing with when they were talking, she talked about floods. I had no idea. I mean, I had shied away from low ground and cover crops because I thought it would be too hard to, I thought it would keep the soil damp. I mean, you wouldn't be able to plant in it.
Right.
And after going up to an event that they held up at Creighton, I was just amazed that those guys were saying that's probably the #1 place where you should plant a cover crop. I was not thinking that way at all. So yeah, I mean, those events and stuff like that, and just talking and networking back and forth is really, really important, because there was no idea that it would ever, that never even crossed my mind.
I love what you keep coming back to, Ed, which is this element of networking and information sharing. And that's something that's going to stick with me, and make sure we take that forward in conversations. Michelle, I want to give a shout out to you, because you're making some incredible offers. You're almost like Oprah, where it's like, hey, you get a cover crop and you get a cover crop. You've got some great offers. So thank you for that. I know it's going to be captured from the questions, and MRCC will take this forward and share information as applicable. Jeff, I like the fact that you provided a question here that segues very nicely into what we just talked about. So, you know, back to Pepsi, but anyone can answer too, specifically looking at the social impacts that results from environmental outcomes. You know, how are you doing that? You know, how do you include farmers and their families? They're the most immediate stakeholders. So how are you gathering that social impact component and making sure that's part of what we talk about?
Well, I might turn this back over to Lydia, but I would say it's just one of the fundamentals when we're looking, before we even do anything on the ground and engage with those farmers, is we're seeing, who do you trust in your farming community? Who's going to help you in this journey? And it might be, you know, that guy on the corner, that iconic farmer, because I can tell you, where I grew up, everyone was way more interested in listening to that one farmer who did something different and it worked than anybody else. Anybody selling them anything, anybody from a government extension network. They really wanted to hear from that guy on the corner who did something that worked. But that's the first question we ask, is sort of, who do you trust and who do you want to hear from? And so then that's who we want to work with when we're coming in as a corporate entity, to say, who do you want to support to provide the right social network, the right agronomic advice, the right financial pass-through to those farmers. So I would just say, for us, it's kind of a precondition of who we want to work with, is those who are going to work with farmers in the way that we would like to, you know, support them, that we've heard from them.
And I'll just add that, you know, as the implementing partner, we ask farmers directly questions like this to try and get at sort of the social benefits. So, you know, last year when we're chatting with them and sort of wrapping up our cost share program, we asked them, like, you know, are cover crops benefiting the bottom line on your farm? Like, are they benefiting you economically? And sort of, is that allowing more flexibility? And overwhelmingly, not shocking, in a cover crop cost share program, most of them said yes. But also, just anecdotally, you know, we are seeing that cover crops especially can, you know, open the door to allowing more families to come back to the farm by allowing increased business opportunities, whether it's bringing cattle back to the farm, like Ed said, and so having an added enterprise that integrates well with the cover crops, or adding something like a cover crop business back to the farm, you know, helping other farmers apply cover crops with a helicopter, with an airplane, with a drill, growing some of that cover crop seed. And so we're actually able to build back some of that rural resilience that's honestly really been eroded in the Midwest and a lot of these small towns, you know, in the last 50 years, by bringing back a practice like cover crops. So it really does help us with more social resilience, in addition to just on-farm environmental resilience.
Excellent. I am watching the time, but I mean, we have a couple of prepared questions, but before I get to that, Ben, I love your question. It's almost like the $1 million question. So Ben lays this out very clearly, which is to say, we've heard the stories this morning. We know that there's great research out there. There's supported benefits for cover crops, yet the fact remains only 5% of the acres are currently planted with cover crops. So what are those barriers for scaling? Why are we not where we need to be with some of what we shared today going back 10 plus years?
Ed, I'm curious to hear from you first, perhaps. What do you think is the barrier with farmers in your area?
As far as just not willing to accept the practices and peer pressure. It sounds, but I mean, you know, there's been a little bit. I mean, a lot of it is probably the biggest thing is they're always worried about moisture. If they plant a cover crop, how much moisture is that's going to take out of the ground. Expense is always another one. And Dad didn't do it that way. I mean, that's a lot of the way it is, you know, with some of these younger guys that have opened up the can of worms. You know, you go to the coffee shop, which I don't, but the coffee shop is, wow, what's that kid doing, you know, south of town with those cover crops? But, you know, everything takes a little bit of time. It's kind of like no-till. First few years of no-till, you maybe have a little yield drag or something, but with the cover crops, all of a sudden you start seeing these benefits, and it just takes a little bit of time. So
Ed, let me jump in and ask you, because I totally hear you about the kind of the tactics, but are there policy barriers or policies that are, you know, really discouraging the practice that you could point to? And this will be from Margaret and Lydia as well.
Well, I'm not quite sure if I understand your question, but I still think if you had some kind of programs to have some guys dabble their feet a little bit more, and it wasn't going to cost them so much to do, I think that, you know, it all comes down, and it comes down to speed. I mean, man, we have grown in just like everything else. The world of agriculture is so fast paced anymore. Guys want to get in and out of the field as quick as they can. It's another step, another thing that they have to do. And, you know, Roundup was a great product, and the chemicals that we have now are great products, but there's still things that we need to kind of do because we've got so efficient with growing crops, but we still have to look at our environment too, as far as trying to you know, with carbon credits and everything like that. There's a reason why these storms are coming in and stuff. I guess we got to try to figure out how to stop it. That make any sense to you?
It does.
I'm happy to compliment Ed a little bit on sort of the policy, and I'd actually love to bring in the financial institution side as well. I think there's a lot that can be done to help farmers out in starting to try this stuff or expanding acreage if they've tried a little bit. I think that all of the different incentives that farmers face and farm owners, not just farm operators, but farm owners face that could help to incentivize these kinds of practices being done on the land are absolutely critical. From federal policies to state policies, tax incentives to other kinds of incentives that are rolled out to farmers. There's a lot of great movement in the government across different administrations that has been pushing in the right direction around climate smart agriculture. The USDA is coming out with some fantastic incentives very soon that are looking to support these kinds of changes across the US Midwest landscape and all of the US. And they're looking to do it in a very inclusive way for a wide variety of different types of farmers and aspiring farmers, which is fantastic. I think we could also see that from the financial sector. You know, insurance, operating loans, shouldn't all of these things recognize the increased resilience of farmers who are implementing these kinds of practices and reward and incentivize them at a much larger scale? We'd like to see the public and the private sectors and many different parts of them working together. You know, we're sitting down with our competitors to try to get this work done at a systems level. Surely we can also sit down with multiple different parts of the public and private sector to think about the system in a different way.
And I'll just round that out a little bit more. I totally agree with Margaret and Ed. And, you know, again, as was poised to me, agriculture is a really complex system. And so in addition to working with the players in the room, we're also trying to work with other trusted partners. We just had an agronomist boot camp last week all about cover crops, because a lot of farmers, go to their agronomists for their crop management at their co-ops. And so making sure that those people are also equipped to be able to understand the management of cover crops and feel confident advising farmers on cover crops is all part of like moving us forward. Because the reality is that even if there are these incentive mechanisms coming down the pipeline, like farmers can just keep doing what they've been doing, and that's the status quo allows that. And it's, it's scary and hard to make a shift. So I think just like culturally, there's a lot of barriers to just trying something new that can seem scary, or that maybe the only experience about it is that it's failed. And so it's making sure that everyone in the system, other farmers, your co-op agronomist, your lender, your crop insurance agent, your end buyer, we're all here, like all moving in the same direction, all aligned.
Excellent. So here's the final question. I always like a little bit of lightning round. So we have a lightning round. Lydia, you're in my box, you're in my view, you're going to go first, right? We got 2 minutes. Keep that in mind. If you could switch, so based on everything you've said, if you could flick a switch, what's the one thing that you would just put at the top that we have to do?
Oh, well, I'm going to just like totally switch gears here and bring in another thing, which is that I want more markets for more diverse crops. That's what I want. I want more markets for cover crop seed. I want more markets for things other than corn and soybeans. And so that if farmers want to diversify and add more resilience in that way, they can, because they have an opportunity to sell something off their farm. And right now, we just don't really have that.
Great, great. Margaret, you look like you're ready.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm not going to say anything different. I think we need to actually just stop talking about it so much and start getting it done with farmers at the center. Get farmers in every single conversation about this, or at least their voice to be heard, and start putting our money where our mouth is and our action on the ground.
Applause for that. Ed, you get the last word. If you could flick a switch, what would you change? How can we help you?
I think we should have probably started this 10 years ago.
Wow, that's well said.
That's
a proof of concept.
Wow. We got to get ahead of this before the horse gets out of the barn, because we got to get this under control. And I think it will. There's more and more guys starting to go in the right direction. Okay. Well, I really want to thank the panelists. This was an incredible conversation, and I enjoyed moderating. I hope everyone enjoyed what they heard, because I think this was really, really fulfilling. So I'll turn it back to Ariel to close us out.
Thank you so much, Ray, and thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Monument Advocacy and to our tech and administrative logistics managers on this call, which have been Tim and Camille. And Camille has also been doing so much work behind the scenes getting to this point. So thank you to everyone involved. And I also want to thank again the Walton Family Foundation for supporting this work in our policy engagement. Another reminder that we are releasing our report today that goes into these issues and what we see as priorities and key recommendations for Farm Bill and public policy broadly to support regenerative agriculture in the Midwest. The link to that is in the chat, and it is hot off the press, as hot as the posting a PDF on our website can be, but we're really excited to share that, and we look forward to continuing engagement. I want to thank all of the attendees today for spending this time with us this morning. And please do sign up for our newsletter. You can find this and lots more information on our website, which is midwestrowcrop.org. And with that, I will close it out and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
I am going to go ahead and end the webinar. Well done, everyone. Congratulations. And be sure to read that fantastic report. Well done.